Hey guys, welcome to Soothing Bedtime, your cozy corner for gentle bedtime stories that help you drift off while learning something new. Tonight, we're slipping quietly into the narrow, stone-lined streets of ancient Rome, where the dawn hasn't quite arrived, but the city is already stirring in strange ways. Somewhere nearby, a cartwheel clunks over uneven paving stones, the sound echoing between tall, insulate apartment blocks. The air is heavy with a smell so rich and comforting you can almost taste it warm bread with that faint tang of fermentation still clinging to it. It's the kind of scent that makes even the grumpiest senator stop mid-sentence and inhale. And you're right here in the middle of it. Just maybe don't eat anything yet. You probably won't survive this, what with the questionable sanitation and all that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far our little nighttime bread trail reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start moving through the half-light, passing doorways where oil lamps still burn, casting gold halos on worn wooden beams. Rome isn't quiet, even at this hour. There's the distant rush of the Tiber, the occasional bray of a donkey, the mutter of a guard trying to keep warm at his post. But above it, all above, politics, taxes, and gossipy's hunger. The city wakes hungry every single morning, and someone has to feed it. That someone isn't a single person, it's an army. Not soldiers this time, but bakers. Thousands of them. Historians still argue whether there were hundreds of commercial bakeries or closer to 1,000 in peak imperial Rome. But either way, they had to churn out unimaginable quantities of bread daily. And remember, no one here has a refrigerator. Whatever comes out of those ovens has to be eaten, traded, or given away in hours before it starts to turn into a jawbreaker. You glance up and catch the pale outline of the Capitoline Hill in the distance. But your focus is on street level, on the sudden bursts of heat and light spilling from open bakery doors. Inside, silhouettes move quickly, strong arms shoving long wooden paddles into roaring ovens. You can hear the hiss as loaves meet stone, the scrape as they're pulled out again. It's almost hypnotic. A baker steps into the doorway, his tunic clinging to his back with sweat despite the cool morning air. He has flour dust in his hair, on his eyelashes, even along the curve of his ear. You'd think he rolled into stuff for fun, but no, this is just life here. Without men like him, the city's rhythm would break. The politicians could still argue, the gladiators could still fight, but Without bread, riots, actual riots. That's how important these dawn smells are. And Rome's daily bread isn't just a cultural quirk, it's infrastructure. The annona. The state-run grain distribution exists to keep bellies full and tempers cool. You might think of it as an ancient food security program, except one where your ration of grain comes with an unspoken reminder to behave. Past a row of shops, you catch sight of a mule cart parked awkwardly, blocking half the street. The driver's dozing against the wall, reins slack, while his cart overflows with sacks of flour. Some of it's destined for household kitchens, but most will end up in those bakeries you've been smelling. The sacks are tied with coarse rope, and one has split slightly enough to leave a trail of pale dust along the cobblestones. You almost follow it like a bread-obsessed Hansel until it disappears into another doorway. Not far from here, in the Forum, politicians will be climbing the rostra to make speeches before noon. Senators will shake hands, scribes will scratch wax tablets, and somewhere in the crowd, someone will sell snacks flatbreads hot from a nearby oven, maybe brushed with olive oil and sprinkled with herbs, like a warm knife through. Well, you get it. You pause at a street fountain, the water trickling over worn marble. Two women stand nearby, each with a large wicker basket balanced against a hip. They're not talking much, just waiting. Their bread will come soon enough. Hand it to them, still steaming, the crust crackling under their fingers. And no one here needs to ask if it's fresh. You can tell by touch, by smell, by the way steam curls from the torn edge. A cat darts past you, a flash of shadow between lamplight and darkness, probably heading toward the same place. You are the source of those smells. And here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some Roman bakers actually kept cats in the bakery, partly to keep rats from helping themselves to the grain stores, and partly because, well, they liked the company. You can picture it, a fat tabby sprawled near the oven, soaking up heat like a living bread loaf. The street narrows, forcing you to sidestep into a shallow doorway as a group of men passes, carrying an enormous wooden tray between them. It's stacked with round loaves, each scored with deep lines across the top, almost like spokes on a wheel. They're heading toward the Sabora, where the poorer districts press in tight and every mouthful counts. This is where bread isn't just breakfast, it's survival. The sky has shifted from deep indigo to a pale, cold blue. Soon the streets will be full. Vendors setting up stalls, children darting between legs, litter swept into gutters by early risers with brooms made of bundled twigs. But you're already in a thick of the real morning rush. Not the clanging, market-busy one you might picture, but the quiet, urgent rhythm of Rome's stomach waking. And you, lucky you, get to wander right through it, following the trail of warm air, yeast, and flour toward the heart of the baking world. You push deeper into the maze of streets, where the lamplight doesn't quite reach and the stone underfoot feels cooler, almost damp. Somewhere behind you, a cart creaks, its iron wheel rim grinding against cobblestones. But ahead is the real, pull the soft thump of dough landing on a wooden workbench. The bakeries here have no windows to speak of, just wide open doorways leading straight into the heat. Inside, you catch sight of a dozen figures moving in rhythm, their shadows long and jerky against the walls from the flicker of oil lamps. These are the night bakers, the people who work while the rest of Rome sleeps. You might think midnight is a strange time to start making bread, but without them, the morning crowd would face empty counters and stale loaves from the day before. They've been here for hours already. Sleeves rolled high, forearms dusted white. A thick, sweet sour smell hangs in the air, part flour, part yeast, part wood smoke canned. The heat is enough to make your skin prickle. One man stands over a wide trough, pushing and folding the dough with a force that makes you wince. He works in silence, except for the soft, rhythmic slap of the dough against the bench. Another baker, younger and quicker, is sprinkling flour from a clay pot, letting it fall in a thin, even snowfall across the table. Historians still argue whether Roman bakeries relied more on enslaved labor or hired free workers during peak production, but from the look of it tonight, you suspect it's a mix. One man's tunic is worn thin and patched. Another wears a better belt and sandals that might have cost a week's wages. Whoever they are, they all move with the same steady efficiency, no chatter, no wasted steps, a fringe detail you wouldn't expect. Some bakeries here keep their oil lamps burning through the entire night, not just for light, but to deter pests, moths, flies. Even mice apparently prefer darker, cooler corners. So the flickering glow isn't just for ambience. You edged closer. The floor gritty under your sandals, and notice a woman working at a smaller table in the corner. She's not kneading, she's cutting the dough into portions with a flat-edged tool, weighing each piece by hand, her fingers quick and sure. No brass scales, no measuring cups, just muscle memory. She slides the portions toward another man who shapes them into neat rounds, pressing and tucking until the surface is smooth. The loaves are then placed on a long wooden board, ready for the ovens you can feel more than see. at this angle. The air is alive with tiny sounds. The rasp of cloth wiping flour from the bench, the muted clunk of clay jars, the faint wheeze of someone's breath. You realize that in this little corner of the city, the hours before sunrise are the busiest. Of all, the heat from the ovens means they can't work in full daylight, not without turning the place into a sweat lodge. Besides, customers expect bread ready at first light, not an hour later. You glance at the door and notice a small boy, maybe 8 years old, leaning against the frame. His job, from the way he scans the street, is to watch for trouble, theft, fire, maybe even the odd drunk stumbling in by mistake. Bakeries keep strange hours, and strange hours attract strange visitors. He catches your eye and tilts his chin toward the back, where the real heat is coming from. You follow his gaze and step sideways to avoid a man carrying a sack of grain across his shoulders. It's heavier than it looks. The man staggers slightly before dumping it onto a table with a dull thud. Dust bursts from the top like smoke, hanging in the lamplight before settling on the nearest baker's arms. The dough trough is now full to the brim. The bakers lean in, folding and turning it in a rhythm almost like rowing a boat. There's a sound you don't expect, a soft tearing, almost like fabric, every time the gluten strands stretch under their hands. You watch the dough transform from shaggy and lumpy to smooth and elastic, a living thing that resists just enough to prove it's ready. A younger man, maybe an apprentice, steps up with a clay jug of water and pours it carefully into a smaller bowl of dough. He stirs with his hands, pulling in the edges, his brow furrowed in concentration. Someone cracks a joke you can't quite catch, and there's a brief ripple of laughter before the rhythm resumes. Even in the middle of the night, even under the weight of labor, they find those small moments. Outside, a rooster calls from somewhere up the hill, though dawn is still a while off. It's a reminder that the city never really sleeps, it just shifts its workers in and out like a theater changing sets. The bakers, though, are always the first act. One man heads toward the ovens with a long wooden peel, basically a flat shovel for bread. The heat is staggering. You can feel it even from the doorway. He slides the dough rounds inside, each movement quick but precise, making sure no loaf touches another. The oven's mouth glows red, a dragon's throat waiting to breathe. You step back as the boy at the door yawns wide enough to make his eyes water. He's been here for hours too, though his shift will end as soon as the bread is loaded. The bakers themselves won't be done until well after sunrise. When the last loaf leaves, and the floor is swept clean. Then they'll vanish into the city. Most people never knowing their faces. By now, the smell has deepened, richer and warmer. Somewhere in the back, the first batch is baking, and the crust is starting to form. You know, in another 15 minutes, this whole street will be flooded with that smell, the kind that makes even the most self-controlled passerby stop and hand over a few coins without thinking twice. The boy leans against the door again, eyes half closed, and you can't help but think this is the heartbeat of Rome right here. Not the marble forums, not the grand speeches, but this dark little room, these tired hands, and the loaves slowly rising in the heat. The closer you move to the back of the bakery, the more the air feels like you've stepped into the throat of a volcano. Your skin prickles instantly, a bead of sweat slipping down the back of your neck, and you haven't even crossed the threshold of the oven room yet. The heat here isn't just warmth, it's the kind of fierce, all-consuming blast that makes you squint. You pause at the edge where the flicker of the oil lamps meets the searing glow from the brick furnaces. They sit low to the ground, domed like enormous clay tortoises, their mouths wide enough for a man to crawl inside, though you'd only try that if you had a death wish. The arching openings flare with orange light, and inside you glimpse coals, so bright they're almost white. These aren't timid cooking fires. These are dragon mouths, always hungry, always hissing. A baker steps forward with his wooden peel, the long handle stretching well over 2 meters so he can reach the back without setting his eyebrows on fire. With a practiced shove, he slides a round loaf deep into the glowing chamber. Another baker calls out something about the spacing end. They adjust quickly, because here, bread too close together will merge into an unsellable lump, and bread too far apart wastes precious heat. Historians still argue whether Roman bakery ovens were fired exclusively with wood, or also with other fuel sources like charcoal from fruitwood trees. Either way, the fuel has to be fed in constantly to keep the heat stable. Let it dip too low, and your crust will suffer. Too high, and your bread will blacken before the crumb has a chance to set. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some bakers, supposedly, threw a pinch of ground herbs, rosemary, thyme into the embers now and then, not for flavoring the bread directly, but to scent the air in the shop and entice customers waiting outside. Imagine walking by, catching that herbal smoke in your nose, and suddenly remembering you needed bread. You edge closer and can feel the heat curling around your ankles, sneaking up your legs in waves. The bakers wear tunics damp with sweat, their hair plastered to their foreheads. One man keeps a damp cloth over his mouth, not for health, but to make breathing in this furnace bearable. Even with the cloth, you can see him inhale carefully, like he's learned to sip the air instead of gulping it. The oven masteran, older man with arms, like twisted rope, moves with absolute authority. He gestures without words, and the others shift positions, stepping aside just in time for him to swing the next loaded peel forward. He has a way of glancing at the fire, then at the dough, and somehow knowing exactly when to turn the loaves. No timers, no thermometers, just decades of reading heat by color and scent. At one side of the room, another oven door is being opened. A rush of heat explodes outward, carrying the first wave of that unmistakable, crusty smell, malty, almost sweet. The baker pulls a loaf free and taps the bottom with his knuckle. It makes a hollow sound, and he grins, satisfied. Bread that sings when you knock it. That's the mark of a perfect bake. The process here is a delicate balance of chaos and control. Too many loaves in at once, and you smother the heat. Too few, and you waste fuel. Timing is everything, and there's no set it and forget it option. Someone is always watching, turning, shifting, adjusting. Better than to leave an oven unattended for more than a breath. Flour and ash, a strange mix of clean and dirty, all at once. A half-burned stick leans against the wall, used earlier to stir the embers. The air tastes faintly of smoke, dry enough to make you reach for water you don't have. A younger baker darts in, carrying a stack of wooden boards already loaded with shaped dough. He sets them down, and the oven master signals where each one should go. They work like a team of stagehands, silent but coordinated. Every movement aimed at keeping the dragon satisfied and the bread consistent. And here's something else to note. These ovens are never truly cold. Even when off, they hold a deep, lingering warmth in the bricks. That means the first fire of the day catches faster, and the cycle never really resets. You could say they're like the city itself, always simmering, never entirely at rest. The boy from earlier slips in, holding a cup of watered wine for one of the bakers. The man downs it in a single gulp and wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, then goes straight back to work. There's no pause, no lean back, chat, break. Bread waits for no one. Suddenly, a crackle from the far oven draws attention. A bit of crust has caught the edge of the fire and flared. The oven master reacts instantly, sliding the peel in, lifting the loaf just enough to avoid burning it. The smell of toasted grain intensifies for a moment, like someone turned the volume up on your nose. By the time the loaves are ready to come out, you're almost dizzy from the heat. One by one, they're pulled onto the wooden boards. There, crusts blistered and golden. Steam curls upward when the tops crack open. The sound is so soft, you almost miss it, a whisper from bread to baker, saying it's ready. The loaves are carried out toward the front, where cooler air waits. The bakers follow with flushed faces and damp tunics, already loading the next batch. Behind them, the dragon mouths keep glowing, their bellies never empty for long. You step back into the main room, blinking against the sudden dimness after that blaze. Outside, the street is still quiet, but you know it won't be for long. The ovens are ready, the first batches are cooling, and somewhere in the city, the first customer is about to bite into the morning's bread. You step back into the street, the cool air slapping your overheated skin like a bucket of water. To be fair, a much more pleasant bucket. The glow from the ovens fades behind you, replaced by the softer, paler light of a city on the edge of dawn. But the trail you're following doesn't end here. The bread that's just been pulled from those dragon mouths started its life far from these cramped Roman streets. You tilt your head and think of the sacks of flour stacked in the corner of the bakery. That flour didn't just appear there. It came from grain that may have traveled hundreds, even thousands of miles. Most of Rome's wheat supply came from its provinces. The golden fields of Egypt, the flat plains of North Africa, the fertile stretches of Sicily. You picture it swaying under the sun, stalks bending in the wind. An entire season's gamble standing there in neat rows. Harvest time meant armies of workers in the fields. Sickles flashing in rhythm, the air full of the dusty sweetness of ripe grain. From there, it was bundled into sheaves, threshed to shake the kernels free, then winnowed so the husks blew away in the breeze. All before it even touched a ship. You might be thinking, that's a lot of work for a loaf of bread, gah. And yes, is. But Rome didn't grow enough wheat inside its own borders to feed its swollen population. By the height of the empire, the city's grain intake was staggering, some estimates say. 150,000 tons per year. That's enough to make you understand why the Tiber docks looked like a chaos painting of carts, mules, and shouting men. Here's the part where historians still argue exactly how centralized the grain trade was. Some insist the state controlled almost all of it. Others believe wealthy merchants played a larger role, buying and selling like modern wholesalers. Either way, the process was constant. There was no off-season for Rome's appetite. Now, imagine this. The grain from Egypt alone took weeks to travel. First, it had to be carted to the Nile, then loaded onto river barges. From there, it sailed north on the Mediterranean in ships with square sails and hulls stuffed to the brim. Those ships weren't just fighting the waves. They had to dodge storms, pirates, and the occasional overager customs inspector. Quirky tidbit: some captains actually carried small altars on board, offering bread to the gods before setting sail, just to improve their odds of a safe trip. When a shipment finally reached, dock workers carried the grain in wicker baskets or poured it from ship's hold to waiting carts, sending up clouds of chaff that made the air look like gold dust in the sun. From there, the grain traveled upriver by barge or by road, entering the city through gates that saw more food than soldiers. The streets closest to the docks would be lined with warehouses, long, low buildings stuffed with sacks piled higher than your head. And here's the clever part: to keep grain from spoiling, they'd store it off the ground on wooden platforms and keep the doors facing away from the sun. No fridge, no problem, just smart architecture and constant turnover. You picture one of those sacks being hoisted onto a cart pulled by two stubborn mules, the drivers shouting at them in Latin so salty you're glad you don't understand every word. The cart creaks and groans over the cobbles, winding toward the bakery you just left. Every bounce sends up a faint puff of flour that drifts into the air, unnoticed by the crowds beginning to gather. The closer you get to the grain's origin, the more you realize this is an empire's lifeline. Grain ships had official escorts, contracts, and insurance long before the modern world thought of them. Some were so essential that if a storm sank one, the owner could be reimbursed by the state, not because they liked the guy, but because every missing ship meant hungrier citizens and a riskier political climate. You follow in your mind's eye the full chain, a stalk bending under the Egyptian sun, cut by a sweating worker, tied in a bundle, loaded on a barge, shipped across seas, unloaded by dock hands, stacked in a Roman warehouse, milled into flour, kneaded into dough, and finally baked in the furnace you stood beside. It's almost dizzying to think about how much could go wrong at each step. Back in the street, the dawn light is growing stronger. A woman passes with a basket on her head, filled not with bread, but with figs and olives for the market. Behind her, a man pushes a two-wheeled handcart loaded with sacks grain for tomorrow's baking. You can almost hear the city's appetite pulling it forward, invisible but unstoppable. And maybe that's the strangest part. For all the speeches in the Senate, all the statues in marble, all the dramas in the amphitheater, nothing bound Rome together quite like this steady, relentless flow of grain. Without it, the city would shrink, starve, or riot. With it, the ovens keep burning, the streets keep humming, and the morning smells you've been following never fade for long. You find yourself drawn toward a steady, rhythmic sound low, grinding like a giant chewing on stone. It comes from a squat building tucked between two insulae, the doorway wide enough for a mule to pass through. Inside, the air is thick with floating motes of pale dust. You've stepped into one of Rome's mills, where grain becomes the flour that feeds those dragon-mouth ovens. The space is half in shadow, save for shafts of dawn light slipping through high slits in the wall. You see two large stone wheels, one fixed and one turning slowly, crushing the golden kernels into powder. The rotation is driven not by hand, but by a patient, slightly bored-looking donkey. Its eyes are half-lidded as it walks in a never-ending circle, the wooden beam across its shoulders groaning softly with each turn. The smell here is earthy and nutty, undercut with a dryness that clings to the back of your throat. Historians still argue whether most urban mills in Rome used animal power like this, or if water wheels were more common in certain districts. Some archaeological finds suggest both operated side-by-side donkeys and mules for smaller local operations and water-powered mills near aqueduct channels for larger output. Either way, this grinding was essential, and it happened all day, every day. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some donkeys in Roman mills supposedly wore little cloth hoods, not for protection from dust, but to keep them from getting dizzy or distracted by their own repetitive motion. Imagine your whole job being to walk in a circle, and someone decides you're better off not seeing it. The mealer, a wiry man with arms dusted white up to the elbow, leans over the stones and checks the fineness of the flour. He rubs a pinch between his fingers, eyes narrowed, then adjusts a wedge of wood to bring the stones closer together. The grinding sound changes slightly, becoming a shade sharper, and a fresh cloud of flour drifts upward. It settles on your hair and shoulders before you can even brush it away. In one corner, a boy works with a sieve, shaking the ground flour through fine mesh to separate the softest, whitest powder from the coarser bran. The sifted flour falls into a wide basket, ready for the bakers who want loaves with a lighter crumb. Not all bread here is the same sum. Customers prefer darker, denser loaves, made with more bran left in, both for taste and because it's cheaper. The coarser flour has its own destiny, sold to poorer families or used for flatbreads and porridges. Nothing goes to waste. Even the leftover bran can be fed to animals or mixed into cheaper dough. A second donkey plods into view, led by a girl barely taller than its shoulder. She carries a small bag of grain, which she hands to the miller without a word. The miller tips the contents into the hopper above the grinding stones, and the circle begins anew. This is the unglamorous, muscle-powered heartbeat behind every bakery shelf. You take a slow lap around the room, careful to keep out of the animal's path. The floor is a patchwork of packed earth and scattered chaff. In the far corner, leaning against the wall, are spare millstones, circular slabs, taller than your chest, with rough grooves carved into their faces. When a stone wears too smooth, it must be replaced or recarved, otherwise the grind loses its bite. The sound is hypnotic. Step, creak, grind. Step, creak, grind. You can imagine this exact rhythm carrying on for hours without a single change. The donkey stopping only to drink from a bucket or switch direction to even out the wear. And then there's the faint trickle of grain pouring into the stones, a sound almost like sand slipping through an hourglass. It's a reminder that milling isn't just about crushing needs, about a steady, controlled feed. Too much grain at once, and the stones jam. Too little, and you waste time. Every handful of flour here represents a chain of labor stretching backward: farmers, harvesters, transporters, soundwards, sellers, and the customers who will tear into that bread later today. You're standing in the middle of that chain, watching the link that transforms a raw crop into something usable. The miller glances at you, perhaps wondering why you're staring at a donkey walking in circles like it's the most fascinating thing you've ever seen. But in truth, there's something quietly mesmerizing about it. The whole city depends on this repetitive, dusty work. Most people barely notice it. As you step back toward the doorway, you see another cart waiting outside, 2 sacks of grain, ready to be milled, and a third filled with fresh flour for delivery. The mule pulling it flicks its ears, impatient to move. The driver calls something sharp in Latin, and with a creak and groan, the cart begins to roll away. You watch it disappear down the street toward a bakery you passed earlier. You know what's waiting. There are those ovens, those hands, that rush of heat and smell. But for now, you're content to linger in the cool shadow of the mill, feeling the faint vibration of the grinding stones under your feet. The donkey keeps walking, the grain keeps falling, and the rhythm doesn't falter for a moment. Leaving the mill behind, you follow the rutted street toward a faint, rising chatter. The smell of flour fades, replaced by the mingled aromas of yeast, honey, and dodly olives. You've stumbled into the pistrinum, the bakery proper, where the transformation from dusty powder to fragrant bread takes place. The room is warm, but not suffocating, not yet. A baker stands near a low wooden table, forearms corded with muscle, plunging them rhythmically into a mound of dough. He folds, presses, and turns with a speed that comes only from years of doing it without thought. The dough glistens faintly, not with oil, but with the natural sheen of well-developed gluten. Near the table, several round lumps of dough rest under damped cloths. They look like they're sleeping, but they're alive in insensed colonies, feasting on the sugars in the flour, exhaling gas that will swell the loaves. Some bakers here still rely on sourdough starters handed down for years, a microbial lineage that can outlast any single human. A young apprentice is sweeping flour off the floor, but not before sketching an absent-minded spiral in the dust with his broom. Another stands on tiptoe to peek into a jar of sticky, golden honey, perhaps meant for sweet rolls later in the day. In the back, you spot the bakery's heart, a massive dome-shaped oven, its mouth wide and blackened, the air around it shimmering with heat. Earlier, when the millstones were still turning, this oven was already being fired. Bakers here don't wait for orders. The city eats too much bread for delays. The fire is pushed to the sides, leaving the middle clear. A man with a long-handled peel slides raw loaves inside in a practiced dance, one forward, one sideways, another nudged just enough to make room for its neighbor. They'll bake quickly in the trapped heat, their crusts developing that distinctive Roman pattern from the string tied around each loaf before baking. It's not decorative, it's a portion marker, making the bread easy to divide. Later, some loaves have dark specks in the olives, perhaps, or crushed herbs. Others are meant for wealthier customers, enriched with milk or sesame seeds. But most are plain panis quadratus, the everyday staple. A few customers have already drifted in despite the early hour. A woman with a clay token for her free grain allowance. An older man holding 2 copper coins. A boy sent with a cloth-lined basket to carry the family's bread home. Their voices mingle with the hiss of steam escaping the oven. The baker in charge barely looks up as he takes orders, his hands dusted white from fingertips to elbows. His focus is split half on shaping the next round of dough, half on judging the progress of the loaves baking behind him. Occasionally, he reaches for a long hook to pull one loaf closer to the opening, checking its bottom crust for color. There's a low shelf near the wall, stacked with cooling loaves. The smell here is intoxicating nutty, slightly sour, with a deep roasted note where the crusts have browned. You can almost taste it just by breathing, but bread is only part of the work. On another table, a woman is rolling out thin sheets of dough for libima, kind of honey cake. She sprinkles the surface with crushed nuts, rolls it into a tight coil, and tucks it into a small earthen dish ready for baking. These will sell faster than the bread if the festival crowd comes early. Your eye catches on a small amphora, half hidden under the table. The faint smell of olive oil seeps from it, likely used to brush over certain loaves to give them a glossy crust. Outside, a boy rushes in with a basket from another bakery. Even competitors share bread when one oven overproduces. He swaps a few loaves, leaves a note on the table, and vanishes again without a word. You realize now that the bakery isn't a quiet, contemplative place. It's a crossroads where grain from distant farms, water from the aqueducts, and human labor all converge into something the city literally cannot live without. The rhythm here is different from the mills, faster, hotter, more urgent, but just as steady. Someone calls out an order for 20 loaves to be sent to a nearby thermopolium, a hot food tavern, and 2 apprentices immediately begin stacking bread into a large reed basket. The delivery boy from earlier will probably be back in minutes to carry it off. The baker finally notices you hovering near the doorway. He nods toward a cooling rack and mutters something, an invitation to take a loaf. You hesitate only a moment before reaching for one. The crust is warm under your fingers, the surface ridged where the string left its mark as you step back into the street. Tearing off a piece, you taste the faint tang of fermentation and the rich, toasty flavor of grain. It's astonishingly good for something so basic. No wonder Romans ate it daily in quantities that would shock a modern dietitian. The sun has fully risen now, and the street outside is coming alive. Hawkers, carts, children, and the smell of bread trailing behind you as you walk. You've followed the grain from field to flour, from dough to oven, and finally to your own hands. You leave the bakery behind, crumbs clinging to your fingers, and follow the hum of the street toward a new sound, a steady hammering, metallic and sharp. It's not the deep clunk of carpentry, but the lighter, ringing rhythm of metal on metal. The smell changes too. Gone is the warm perfume of bread, replaced by the tang of iron, smoke, and something faintly acrid charcoal dust hanging in the warm air. You've arrived at a Faber Ferraris's workshop, the blacksmith. The front is open to the street, and the forge's glow pulses like a heartbeat in the shadowed interior. Even before stepping closer, you can feel the heat pressing. Outward, inside, a man grips a long-handled set of tongs, holding a dull red iron rod against an anvil. With every strike of his hammer, sparks leap in tiny arcs before dying on the dirt floor. The smith's arms are thick, his tunic dark with sweat and ash. His face is streaked where he's wiped away grime with the back of his hand. He works with almost frightening precision. Strike, turn, strike, flip. There's no wasted motion. Every blow brings the piece closer to its final form. A younger apprentice stands at the bellows, feeding air into the forge. The charcoal inside flares brighter. Each time, the iron in the heart of the coals shifting from cherry red to yellow white. The air smells almost sweet at this temperature, iron releasing faint oxides as it yields to the hammer. You notice that the tools around the shop aren't just for shaping metal. There are chisels for cutting, swages for forming curves, and great buckets of water for quenching, sending a hiss of steam into the rafters whenever a piece is cooled too fast. The smell of hot iron hitting cold water is unlike anything else. Sharp, mineral, and oddly clean. On a bench against the wall, finished goods lie in ordered piles. Nails by the dozen, hinges for doors. Small knives with bone handles and stacked, carefully iron rings that might be part of chain armor. Not all of this will stay in the neighborhood. Some will end up in merchant caravans bound for distant provinces. A woman steps up to the shop front holding a bent cooking pot. The smith doesn't stop hammering the piece in front of him, but nods toward a stool. She sets the pot there, and the apprentice, still pumping the bellows, calls out that it will be ready in 2 days. No receipt is needed. Trust runs deep when your work is this visible to the entire street. In a corner, a pile of scrap metal waits to be melted down. Even a broken blade has value as raw material. You spot what might once have been a spearhead, now cracked down the middle, and a few twisted nails so old they've bloomed with rust. The forge hums with more than heat the pulse of the city's infrastructure. Without smiths, there would be no hinges for doors, no nails for carpenters, no plows for farms, no weapons for soldiers. Grain, bread, and iron, these three keep Rome alive as much as politics or armies. As you turn to go, the smith glances up and catches your eye. His look is brief, but assessing, as if measuring not your height or build, but whether you might have the patience for such work. Then he returns to the glowing iron, raising his hammer again. Back outside, the sun is high, and the heat from the forge lingers on your skin. The city street seems louder, now vendors shouting, a mule braying, and somewhere nearby, the clink of amphory being unloaded. Rome is alive in every sense, each craft and trade woven into the daily fabric. The clinking of amphorae draws you toward the next stoppa, Taberna Venaria, a wine shop. Here, the air is cooler, shaded by a deep awning. and the scent is unmistakable. Fermented grapes, resin, and the faint sourness of old barrels. The entrance is open to the street, revealing a counter lined with clay jars, each marked with painted inscriptions. Some note the wine's region Falernum, Sycobum, Sorrentan mothers give its age or flavor. A few bear simpler labels, Novum New for fresh vintages, meant to be drunk quickly behind the counter. The shopkeeper, wiry man with a carefully trimmed beard, draws wine from a tall amphora into a bronze jug. He tilts it toward a waiting customer, who swirls the liquid briefly, then takes a sip. A nod, a coin passed, and the jug is poured into a smaller clay vessel to carry away. The wine shop is more than a place to buy drink. It's a point of connection. Two men at the counter debate loudly over which vintage of Florenian is worth the price, while a young courier slips in for a quick cup before darting back into the street. On one wall hangs a small wooden tablet listing today's prices: cheaper wines for laborers, finer ones for citizens who can afford them. You notice the amphorae are sealed, not with corks, but with clay stoppers and resin to keep the air out. Some are half buried in the cool earth floor to maintain a steady temperature in the back. A narrow doorway leads to a storage room where larger barrels and skins hang from hooks. The smell is heavier. They're thick, with the musty tang of fermentation. You spot a single amphora painted with dolphins and vines, clearly meant for a wealthier buyer. Outside, leaning against the shop's wall, two empty amphorae wait to be taken for refilling. Wine is as essential here as bread used in religious offerings, family meals, and political banquets. Even watered-down wine is safer to drink than much of the street's water supply. As you leave, the shopkeeper calls out a casual "Bena ambula," go well, already turning to the next customer. The street beyond is bustling. To your left, you hear the slap of wet cloth against wood praps, a fuller's shop where garments are cleaned in vats of water and clay. To your right, the rhythmic creak of a press suggests oil being squeezed from olives. You can follow either sound, each leading deeper into the city's daily life. You follow the rhythmic creak and press toward the scent of crushed olive, sharp, grassy, and faintly bitter. The source is a modest olearious olive oil workshop, half open to the street. Inside, sunlight filters through a lattice window, catching flecks of oil that shimmer in the air. A massive wooden press dominates the center, its long, horizontal beam weighted with stones. Beneath it, oven mats, thick with crushed olive pulp, slowly release their golden green liquid into a shallow basin. Two workers, bare-armed and slick with sweat, adjust the ropes and levers to increase the press's pressure. One pauses to scrape the pulp reshaping it into fresh mats for another round. The floor bears a permanent sheen of oil, despite sand scattered for traction. Along the walls, rows of amphorae stand ready. Some are newly filled, their mouths sealed with wax, marked with symbols showing the oil's grade. Oleum X albes for the finest, pressed from unripe green olives. Oleum virid for the prized mid-harvest yield, and Oleum catecham from wind-fallen fruit. Cheaper and more pungent, the oil is more than food, it's fuel for lamps, an ingredient in ointments and perfumes, and a base for cleaning the skin in public baths. You watch as a young boy carries a jug across the street to a bathhouse, careful not to spill a drop. Near the doorway, a woman tests the oil's clarity by pouring a small stream into a shallow bowl. She tips it back and forth, judging its brightness in the light. Satisfied, she nods to the shopkeeper, who measures her purchase with a bronze dipper and pours it into a clay jar she's brought from home. The shopkeeper, sturdy man with oil-stained tunic and quick hands, keeps up a steady banter with his customers, gossip about the Senate, a complaint about the latest grain shipment, a joke about the weather in Campania. The shop is both workplace and social hub. Outside, the heat sharpens the oil's scent. You notice a small stand nearby, selling bread dipped in fresh oil and sprinkled with salts, simple, nourishing, and eaten on the move by laborers heading to the forum. The press groans again as the beam is lowered for another batch, the sound blending with the shouts of street vendors and the clatter of passing carts. From here, a narrow lane curves toward the smell of fresh dye and wet fabric. Fuller's Quarter. Another turn could lead you toward the clang of metal and sparks from the blacksmiths. Your path is open. You choose the sharper scent of wet fabric and chalky clay, following it into the Fuller's Quarter. The smell grows stronger with each step. Ammonia, damp cloth, and the earthy Thames of Fuller's earth, a fine clay used for scouring. The workshop is half open to the street, with several large wooden vats sunk into the ground. In each, men stand calf-deep in cloudy water, treading garments underfoot. They move in a steady rhythm, gripping poles for balance. This ancient method, part washing, part pounding works, soapwort, clay, and sometimes fermented urine into the cloth to remove oils and stains. Nearby, another vat steams gently, used for rinsing and bleaching. The water here smells faintly of sulfur, a reminder of the minerals used to whiten wool. The fuller himself, a broad man with rolled sleeves and a loud voice, inspects a tunic held up to the light. He rubs the fabric between his fingers, then calls for it to be rinsed again. Apprentices hurry to obey, sloshing through the work area with bundles of damp clothing. On a wooden rack, garments are stretched, taut, and brushed with a stiff comb to raise the nap, making them softer and warmer. Others are hung in the open courtyard, bleaching under the sun. Some bear faint purple bands, the mark of senators' togas, which must be cleaned with extra care. Fulling is more than laundering. It's a kind of textile refinement. Woolen cloth, fresh from the loom, is oily and loose. After the fuller's work, it is tighter, cleaner, and brighter, ready for the market or the wardrobes of the wealthy. Customers arrive steadily, dropping off tunics and cloaks, often pausing to share news. Fuller, slipping him a coin to ensure her garments are ready sooner than promised. Against the far wall, you spot a smaller workbench where stains are treated individually: wine, oil, or soot, each requiring its own remedy. A pot of chalk dust sits open, ready to draw out grease spots. The street outside is busy with carriers hauling bundles of cloth between workshops, dye houses, and market stalls. You catch sight of a young boy darting past with an armful of garments, chased by a barking dog. From here, you could follow the lane toward the hiss of dye vats, where cloth takes on vivid color, or turn toward the rhythmic ring of hammers from the metalworkers' street. You drift toward the richer scent of steam, smoke, and something almost sweet, like wet wool meeting plant matter in a slow simmer. It draws you to the dyer's quarter, where the air itself seems tinged with color. Huge copper and bronze vats bubble over small brick furnaces, each one fed with firewood that snaps and hisses under the weight of boiling water. Long poles rest across the rims, holding bundles of cloth submerged beneath the surface. You catch flashes of deep crimson, bold yellow, and a soft, almost ethereal sky blue as workers lift the fabric out to inspect it. A young apprentice stirs one vat with a pole nearly twice his height, his tunic splattered with little constellations of dye spots. His hands and forearms are stained in permanent shades of pink and indigo, living proof of a craft that seeps into the skin at one corner. The dyer's master squats beside a basket of crushed plant material, madder, root for red, weld for yellow, and woad for blue. You overhear him mutter about the quality of a batch, complaining that this season's madder isn't as rich in pigment. Historians still argue whether Roman dyers guarded their formulas like state secrets or freely shared them within their guilds. But here, you can tell this man guards his recipes with a glare sharp enough to cut. Then there's the purple. In a shaded side room, a smaller cauldron simmers with a smell that instantly wrinkles your nose. Part rotting fish, part seawater. This is the famous Tyrian purple, derived from the glands of murex sea snails. It's said to be worth more than gold, and a cloak dyed entirely in it could buy a townhouse in Rome. A fringe tidbit you've picked up. Workers sometimes kept live snails in little seawater pens until they were ready to be milked for. The precious dye, taut cloth, meant for the elite, is handled with particular care. Two men in clean tunics lift a toga from the purple vat, their faces tense. Every drip is precious. They carry it to a shaded rack, where it will dry slowly to deepen. Its color, near the open doorway, a group of women and children sort skeins of yarn by shade. They hold them up to the light, matching tones with an eye for even the faintest difference. One woman hums a tune while deftly twisting damp skeins into loose hanks for drying. The dye shop is busy, but almost meditative, except when the fire flares and the apprentices scramble to keep the water at the perfect simmer. You linger, watching the process repeat over and over. Dip, stir, lift, wring, hang. It's hypnotic in its own way, the way bread rising is hypnotic, or waves rolling in. Outside, streaks of runoff water flow down the gutter in faint blues, yellows, and reds, marking the street like an artist's brush, rinsed one too many times. You glance down the lane, where the clanging of metal and the rhythmic hiss of quenched iron promise a different kind of heat and craft. The blacksmith street calls, though the scent of burning charcoal suggests you'll be walking into an even thicker atmosphere than here. You step away from the rainbow runoff of the dyer's quarter and follow the sharper, drier smell of smoke. The metallic tang grows stronger with each stride until the street opens into a stretch of forges, their doorways glowing with the orange breath of fire. Blacksmiths work bare-armed despite the heat, their skin sheened with sweat, the air pulsing with the steady clang of hammer on anvil. Sparks leap and vanish in the shadows, briefly illuminating the darkened beams overhead. One smith, his hair bound back with a strip of leather pulls a length of iron from the coals with tongs, thick, metal, white-hot. In one fluid motion, he lays it on the anvil and hammers it into a narrow blade, the blows ringing like a deep bell. Another man works a double-handled bellows, feeding the fire until the coals glow almost silver at the center. Here, iron is shaped into everything from nails and hinges to farming tools and weapons. You spot a rack of spearheads cooling near the door, their edges freshly ground, alongside rows of sickles and plowshares destined for the countryside. A small corner of the forge is devoted to bronze work thinner, sheets being beaten into decorative fittings or molded into pins and fibulae. The metallic scent mingles with the earthy smoke of charcoal, leaving a taste of iron in your mouth. Across the lane, a farrier tends to a tethered mule, shaping and nailing on a fresh horseshoe, while the animal flicks its ears impatiently. The rhythm is different here. Tap, pause, adjust. Tap less about brute force, more about precision. The street is alive with sound, hammers striking, bellows wheezing, the hiss of metal plunged into water to quench. That last sound is always followed by a cloud of white steam, carrying a sudden wave of heat toward you. Merchants wander through, bargaining for tools or placing orders. One man argues over the weight of a set of scales, insisting the counterweights are off by a fraction. The smith just grunts, tests them with a practiced eye, and makes a micro-adjustment with a file dot. At the far end, you notice a younger smith, working on something far finer, a chain of tiny links, perhaps for a piece of armor or ornate jewelry. His hands move quickly, as though racing the cooling metal. From here, the street forks. One path winds toward the potter's kilns, where clay takes on fire, and the other climbs toward the carpenter's yard, filled with the scent of fresh-cut wood and resin. You climb the narrow slope toward the carpenter's yard, the scent of pine resin hitting you first, followed by the dusty tang of freshly cut oak. Sawdust carpets the ground in golden layers, and tiny curls of wood spiral off benches like sleeping creatures left behind by busy hands. Carpenters work in small clusters, measuring, cutting, and joining timber into everything from doors and furniture to the occasional small boat. You pause to watch a master gluing a frame, clamping pieces with precision that makes the joints appear almost invisible. Historians still argue whether Roman carpenters preferred certain woods over others, or if there were actually regional taste differences in furniture style. A young apprentice hammers nails into a low table while humming a tune you half recognize from some modern folk song, sung to think that even in a world without TikTok, people still needed a soundtrack. The master chuckles, guiding the boy's hand so the nail doesn't split the wood nearby. A group works on a series of chests, each one intricately carved with geometric patterns. The patterns almost shimmer in the late afternoon sun, a quiet rebellion against the utilitarian focus of most urban workshops. You notice tiny chips of colored stone embedded in the handles and almost forgotten decorative flourish. Outside the main shed, a couple of wheelwrights fit iron rims to wooden wheels. They steam the timber first, bending the wooden hoops carefully, then hammer the iron bands into place. The sound echoes off the walls of the yard in a series of sharp taps. a metallic heartbeat. You shiver at the thought of all this coordination. Without a single modern power tool, a delivery man brings bundles of reeds for matting and thin boards for shutters. He balances them expertly on his shoulders, weaving through the maze of workbenches. You marvel at how such coordinations woodworkers, blacksmiths, and delivery men kept the city functioning smoothly. At the edge of the yard, you spot a small, almost secretive section where luthiers fashion string instruments. The necks of lyres and small harps lean against the wall, polished and unstrung. One luthier works meticulously, tuning the delicate tension in the strings. Some say Romans were surprisingly musical, though historians still argue whether these instruments were widespread or confined to the elite. As you wander toward the yard's exit, the sun dips lower, casting long shadows through the gaps in the timbers. You can feel the collective pulse of the city in the rhythm of hammer strikes, saw rasping, and the occasional clink of metal against wood, all synchronized like an urban symphony composed entirely by hand. You leave the carpenter's yard and descend toward the heart of the marketplace, where the real test of Rome's ingenuity lies, feeding a teeming city without refrigerators, freezers, or any modern temperature control. The air is thick with the scent of bread, smoke, and fermenting olives, a cocktail that makes your stomach growl involuntarily. The bakeries are a flurry of activity. You see ovens, huge brick constructions heated with wood glowing like miniature suns. Bakers slap dough onto wooden peels and slide it into the belly of the oven, then pull out golden brown loaves, their crusts crackling softly. You probably wouldn't survive this world if you were tasked with baking a week's worth of bread by hand. Grain arrives in sacks, piled high in corners, some of it still gritty with chaff. You watch millers turn stones with a rhythmical push, grinding the wheat into flour that will soon rise into the daily sustenance of thousands. Historians still argue whether some bakers added emulsifiers or other natural agents to preserve dough longer, or if freshness was everything. A fringe fact catches your eye. Some bakers reportedly used a slurry of fermented fish sauce, garum, in small quantities to make bread more savory. It's bizarre now, but you can almost imagine the umami hitting the tongue. A small child, probably a baker's apprentice, nibbles on a corner of a loaf, his fingers dusted in flour, leaving smudges on his cheeks. You notice a system in place. Bread ovens operate on a strict schedule, with large communal ovens often shared between neighborhoods. Bakers communicate with signaza bell, a shout, or even a flag to coordinate the timing, ensuring the loaves are hot for the market without overproducing and risking waste. Outside, stalls display bread in rows. Round loaves, elongated, baguette-like forms, and flatbreads. You realize Romans were masters at creating variation from a limited set of ingredients. Olive oil, honey, and herbs enhance flavor and shelf life in a way that makes today's pre-sliced supermarket bread look uninspired. The fascinating quirk. Some bakers reportedly buried bread overnight in sand to keep it cooler and maintain moisture, improvised form of refrigeration. Others wrapped loaves in cloth and stored them in cool cellars below shops. You step on a stray olive pit and laugh quietly. Even centuries ago, people were slipping on similar detritus. Customers barter, swapping news, and gossip with coins clinking in leather purses. You feel the heartbeat of a city alive with the smell, sound, and taste of bread. In this choreography of ovens, millstones, and street vendors, you see how ancient ingenuity fed millions without a single thermostat or fridge. Asterisk, you weave deeper into the market. Drawn by the aroma of rising dough mingled with the tang of vinegar from pickled vegetables, bakers shout over one another, exchanging orders, warnings, and jokes that sound surprisingly modern. You almost expect someone to mutter, "Did anyone feed the sourdough today?" The reality is chaotic, but there's rhythm in a tan, organized madness perfected over generations. The city's scale is staggering. Rome housed over 1 million inhabitants at its peak, and you trudge along streets lined with bakeries, each competing to deliver fresh bread before the crowd disperses. You witness slaves carrying trays of loaves, balancing them with impressive dexterity, their forearms straining like the cables of a modern suspension bridge. Historians still argue whether the centralization of grain distribution controlled by the state through a nona really prevented famines or merely masked shortages with bureaucracy. You glance at a stall selling pastries, honey-filled rolls, and puffy fritters glistening with oil. A baker offers a sample, and the sweetness hits your tongue with such intensity you nearly stumble backward. Some Roman bakers even experimented with using snow-packed cellars or underground cisterns to extend shelf life, primitive yet effective. You recall the ridiculous lengths some tried to preserve fish with vinegar, and now see the same inventive, slightly eccentric streak in bread preservation. Street urchins dart between stalls, grabbing crumbs and trading them for favors or coins. One boy tips his cap at you, flour streaked across his nose like war paint. You wonder how many of these kids later became bakers themselves, inheriting the unglamorous but vital craft that keeps a city alive. The ovens themselves are marvels a glowing network of bricks and clay, some fueled by wood, others by charcoal. The heat radiates outward, warming the bakery, but threatening to char your eyebrows if you linger too close. You marvel at the fact that without thermometers, bakers gauged temperature by feel, sight, and intuition alone. Fringe, yet fascinating. Some bakers, reportedly, used ashes from certain trees as natural preservatives or mixed in powdered herbs to prevent mold, secret alchemy of daily survival. Customers, from senators to common plebeians, all relied on this system. Without it, the urban population would face immediate shortages. You step back and watch the flow. Grain arrives, flour is milled, dough is kneaded, ovens glow, bread emerges, and a market hums with trade. Every action is a note in a citywide symphony, a testament to human ingenuity and adaptation. You breathe in deeply, tasting history as much as you see it the warmth. The smells, the grit, the clever hacks that make a metropolis possible without a single modern convenience. Now, let your eyelids drift slowly as you picture the market fading into twilight. The oven's glow softens into a warm amber. The shouts and clatter of merchants taper into gentle murmurs, and the aroma of baked bread lingers like a comforting memory. You feel the city's heartbeat slow, the rhythm of saws, hammers, and millstones replaced by a soft, steady pulse that matches your own. Imagine wandering the quiet streets, the day's work done, and the streets empty save for the distant shuffle of night guards. Each loaf, each carefully milled sack of flour, tells a story of labor, ingenuity, and the small eccentricities that made Rome thrive. Even the oddities, the fish sauce in bread, the buried loaves, the secret herb additives fade into a sense of gentle wonder rather than absurdity. Breathing deeply once more, letting the scents, sounds, and textures of ancient Rome dissolve into a soothing haze. Feel your body settle, your mind lightening, as if walking away from the ovens, the sawdust, and a crowded marketplace into an open, quiet square where the hum of the city persists only in memory. Rest easy, knowing that, centuries later, you carry a small piece of that ingenuity with you. A reminder that even in worlds without refrigeration, without modern convenience, people thrived, adapted, and created beauty and sustenance from the ordinary. The city breathes beneath the stars, and so can you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.